In this video, I want to look at the relationship between strength and speed and demonstrate that while strength is an important attribute for speed running, that the higher the strength gets does not correlate with the amount of speed gained. And I want to come to the conclusion that there comes a point at which the squat, which is a very commonly used strength exercise to develop speed, it simply becomes inadequate because it's not specific enough. Now I'm going to back all of this with the data collected over the last 2 years. N equals 1 as usual, so conclusions really apply to me. But I think as a general principle, there is something to be said here based on the data collected. So the first thing we want to look at is performance in the strength attributes. Now, the foundations of speed I've categorized into this level of, or this hierarchy. The lowest being very much general physical preparation, moving up to special physical preparation in that order. So strength is pretty low on the list, but as you can see that it does in fact dictate the amount of maximum force production, which will dictate acceleration, and acceleration is an important attribute. But from that you would naturally think, okay, so more strength equals more acceleration. But the data I've collected simply doesn't show that. So what I want to do is have a look at these values and see the relationship between strength and speed and how it should inform your training. So the measure on this data for strength is the squat. The measure for acceleration are 30-meter hand times. And the measure for speed is a 200-meter repetition at maximum speed. Now I know this is also a speed endurance distance. I don't have enough reliable data over 60 meters to use that for speed, and the 200-meter will also be dictated by your maximum speed in a large way, because the maximum speed reached, because the lactic acid system is not particularly involved in the 200 meters due to it only being a 25-second effort, the speed endurance is going to be far less engaged than on the 300 meters, which is my measure for the speed endurance. So weight is measured in kilograms, and I've converted all of these raw data into a value which generally goes between 0 to 10, although it's a blunt tool. If I do a time which is better than a 10, I'll just go to 11 and then 12. So it's not like 10 is the best ever. It's just the data based on what we have. So the first thing to look at is this graph, which compares fluctuating body weight and the strength level and the speed endurance level. Now, if you look December 14, weight fluctuates. Now up here we have the highest, that's about 90 kilograms, and right down here we have 79.5 kilograms. So it's about a 10 kilogram fluctuation in weight. Interestingly, higher weight does not necessarily dictate to higher strength, but the general trend here is for a reduction in weight and a similar reduction in strength. So the strength at this point is a 195 kilogram squat. The strength here is a 165 kilogram squat. So we have a 30 kilogram decrease in squatting strength. Obviously, the thing running counter to this whole situation is that speed endurance slowly gets better as strength decreases. So it's an inverse correlation. Can we honestly say that as you get weaker, you get better speed endurance? So, which is what requires the deeper analysis. So if we also look at the strength data diminishing slowly up to the point we're at now, we can also see acceleration getting better and speed getting better. Now before I said that strength was correlated with acceleration because the maximum force production matters. So where strength is getting less but acceleration has a drop here, mainly due to an injury, and then gets better and better, does that therefore mean there's an inverse relationship between strength and acceleration? Because that is counterintuitive. I think the key thing that we have to look at here is actually a more detailed strength to weight ratio. So if we look at the strength to weight ratio, which is on the graph below, you can see that the strength to weight ratio never really goes outside of around double the body weight on the squat. The highest relationship is about 2.28, and the lowest, that's there, and the lowest relationship is 1.94. But that's in December 2015. It's interesting to sort of note that in December 2015, all three speed attributes at the lowest strength to weight ratio are in fact among the highest scores for all three categories, whereas the highest strength to weight ratios do not have comparable scores for speed. So again, we're pointing at this idea that less strength, and indeed less strength to weight, is resulting in better speed times on track. The explanation for this basically is that the squat is inadequate. It is simply an inadequate measure for speed. It's too blunt. And what we need to, it's such a general tool that what we can say, even though there is a variation, effectively this is the same. Strength stays the same on the squat throughout, yet the speed and the speed endurance and the acceleration are all getting better. The reason for the inverse correlation is simply because the squat is a two-leg slow exercise and the sprint is a single-leg fast exercise. The squat is a blunt tool. And so what I'm basically trying to push towards here is that the squat is a really good measure as a general purpose early on in the training, but as you reach a higher level of SPP, it becomes inadequate as a tool to measure your actual strength production. I would say that a more positive correlation between these two values would be shown if the measure of the strength was a single leg application of force in a very, very short period of time, like your foot striking the track. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the level of technology to be able to measure that myself because it probably costs thousands of pounds. But what I would measure this against is the methods of training. So if we are saying that the squat is an inadequate tool, then methods of training that are focusing more on single leg fast productions of force are going to account for these increases of speed while the squat strength is decreasing. So if we look at the training from June to July 2015, which is this period of time here, where strength is on the squat pretty high, yet the speed values that's this period of time here, are still only moderate, we can see that in the old system, the type of training being used is quite heavily biased towards explosive strength, a lot of Olympic lifting, squatting, depth jumps, box squats, depth jumps. Notice it's all double leg work. The depth jump is quite appropriate, but it's very double leg. And so as you can see here, there is a lot of strength training taking place during the months of June and July. Whereas if we contrast that with moving into August, there's a lot more rest being used and there's a lot more tempo running. There is still strength work being performed, but as you can see, it's far less frequent. The emphasis of the training, and especially going into September, now this is what we would call GPP. We would expect GPP to actually result in a decrease in the overall special preparation and the sprint times. But actually what's happening is if we look at September to October, in September to October, all of the speed attributes are getting better and the strength's getting worse. Partly due to a decrease in body weight, but as we can see, all of the speed attributes through September get better, and they continue to get better through the whole GPP process. Now that might be because my methods of GPP are not GPP, they're SPP, but I think that the key things here is that the nature of the training is specific to the competition, i.e. it's running, it's single leg strength production. And what I started doing, we've got hill sprints conditioning towards October, and then towards the next phase of training in November and December, is I started bringing in a weighted vest, a 5 kilogram weighted vest to the training. As you can see here, all tempo sessions being performed with a 5 kilogram weighted vest. Now if you think about that, you're adding to the body weight with the weighted vest, yet the foot strikes are single leg and they are fast and they're through the ground. So the method of strength production is really specific. So I think what we can argue is, yes, the squat's getting weaker, but the amount of strength being produced by individual foot strikes and the technique of the running, because the amount of running that's being done is actually getting better. So within this, we're actually having an increase in the quality of the technique and an increase in the force production in the specific manner in which it's going to be produced in the competition. So this simply points to the fact that as we move through towards January, and the method of training remains generally just one session per day, with the occasional strength session thrown in. But if you look here again, when there is gym work being used, there's a lot more emphasis on the single leg work. So moving back to the strength attributes, the reason for this is simply because squats are inadequate, and that you need a much more specific method of training to continue to increase your speed values once the squat has reached its maximum effectiveness. So it's really interesting to see that the data suggests that the squat is just not going to, once you get to a certain point, it's just not going to add anything. As long as the strength to weight ratio stays around 2, around double your body weight, the squat simply becomes inadequate, and you need a much more specific method of strength training to continue that development. So that's the main conclusion that I'm come to here, and the subsequent training is going to reflect that moving into February, March and April.